Hello. The intent of this video is to go over chapter 8 in the early intervention for reading difficulties so that you can listen to it while you are driving or working out as a review to what you read or a precursor to what you may read or a just in case if you didn't get a chance to read. I want to encourage you that it starts on page 159 and it really is a short chapter. So if you can go through it and be able to read it, I do suggest that because it is. So here we go. We're going to try to keep this short and sweet. Chapter 8 talks about the alphabetic principle and the alphabetic code. And you know, we've read a previous article that talked about the alphabetic principle. And when we look at that, it says goal 5, children should understand that the letters in the printed words represent sounds in spoken words. And they'll understand how to use those beginning and ending consonants in reading and spelling. So it's almost that principle or that code of all of it's going to connect so that when they see the letters, they realize those letters help to form words. Those sounds of the letters are what we hear when people speak. And if we were to try to write the sounds that we hear, then we would use those sounds and the letters to be able to read and to write. It sounds like a simple thing, but that's something that needs to be, as we learned in class the other day, that needs to be communicated in explicit instruction. So on the next page, it's going to break things down. And one of the things it talks about is the early development of skill when using this alphabetic code. So one of the things it lists is grouping and pacing. And basically you want this to be just appropriate for children. And this is if they only know a few letter sounds. So you want them to begin literally at the beginning with the beginning sounds. So that's pretty easy to remember, begin with the beginning. And this usually happens around kindergarten and sometimes before. Next, we talk about the sequence of development. And so you want that to be a gradual, predictable sequence. And so the sequence could look like this. Remember we said begin with the beginning. Beginning letters and sounds, ending letters and sounds, and then the middle letters or larger chunks or units. So when we think about that, if we are beginning with the beginning, I'll repeat myself, so hopefully certain things will kind of just stick. Activities would include working on, of course, the beginning letter. So mat, fat, sat. These will help introduce the alphabetic code for children who are practicing those sounds. Now, once they get proficient with those beginning sounds, then you can work on the ending sounds, the t in all of the words. And once again, you can use word building, word reading, and written spelling activities to help enforce their proficiency in these areas. So in other chapters, we'll talk about word families, but for right now, that's what some of that covered. Then it goes to guided practice. This is when they get to the point where they change the beginning letters to build, read, and spell the words. And so with that guided practice, once again, some things we're going to repeat. They're word building, word reading, and working with spelling. And once again, this is explicit, not something they just catch in a side center. A lot of times, and if you're observing classrooms, you'll see like the teacher doing a small amount of direct instruction, and then sometimes they'll take a larger chunk of time and they'll break it up into all these centers trying to differentiate, which is a really good concept. But at the same time, if you are having students, for example, do activities like word building or reading words or trying to spell the words, and they're doing them in these like little independent centers where no one is watching them or checking them or guiding them onto what they're saying, what they're doing, what the letter sounds like, what happens when you change it. And it's like these almost free for all like rotations. You really have to question, you know, what are you really getting out of that if you're not really watching and there's no one there to model, especially when it comes to the sounds and things like that. So when we talk about word building, if you're taking notes, we're on page 162. The easiest part of this is word building, okay? So this should be the activities that you practice first. And you can use single phonograms such as it and op And just start by changing the beginning of the word. Children can be asked to form those words, refer to keywords to help them recall those sounds. And then you build up to something a little harder or more challenging, and that's word reading. And this is when the teacher changes the beginning letter in the word while the children watch, and then asks the children to read the new word. So this task, like we said, is a little bit more challenging than word building because the children have to recall both the sound of the beginning letter and the sound of the phonogram, and then blend the sounds together. As we continue to move up, we go into written spelling. So with this activity, the children are asked to spell the words that they've been building and reading. At this point, the phonogram will be left in view, and they would be expected to refer to it in order to properly spell the word that was dictated by the teacher. So this task is a little bit more major because they have to analyze the words spoken by the teacher and then decide which letter to use to represent the beginning sound in the word. As we move on, it talks about the role of phonograms and word families. Once again, start with that word family by just changing the what? Beginning letter so that they can learn the phonogram. The goal of this activity is to focus on the what? Beginning letters. That's like our keyword through this whole thing. Start at the beginning, focus at the beginning. Not to stay there, but it's a good thing to remember because you want it to become fluid for them. Or the word the book uses, I'm going to say it wrong, facile, F-A-C-I-L-E. But when I Googled it, it just kind of meant that's something they can do almost automatically. It says, ultimately, it's important for children to learn words that contain the same sound pattern and then share them with the same phonogram. So it helps them to generalize unfamiliar words when they get to them. So then they pose the question, when you're doing independent practice, should you only use real words or should you let them use kind of like these not real nonsense words? And it says teachers have found that when using a letter slide, and there's an illustration on the next page, that it's useful to help children who fidget with things. But when it comes to them determining if it's a real word or not, it says it actually helps them to establish the understanding that words we read actually should make sense. So even if they're doing nonsense words, when they're doing independent practice, you want them to be able to tell you, is this a real word or not? And with that, they learn how to self-monitor, check themselves, and self-correct to realize, is this really a word that I would actually use versus a set of sounds that make a word? All right, as we're getting close to the middle, it talks about strategic emergent reading and writing. And basically it says you should promote word solving during shared reading. Thought that was pretty interesting because we hear in math like problem solving. I've never heard the phrase word solving during shared reading. So this was kind of interesting to me. I think I'll use that for a talking point. But it talks about just periodically when a teacher is reading a text, just draw attention to what? The beginning letters and ask them to decide what the first sound would be. You can also identify a character. Once again, this is word solving, or an object in a book or in print, and ask them, okay, can you find the word bear? What letter do you think it starts with? What sound does the B make? It says the children must first attend to the initial sound of the spoken word. Think then of what letter represents the sound. So not look at the letter and try to generate a sound, but hear the sound bear and then try to come up with, what letter goes with the B sound? But notice they got the sound first. It says if you want to promote effective sound spelling during shared writing, because we're going from shared reading to shared writing, it says you can encourage the children to participate in isolating that beginning sound, once again, beginning, and then decide what letter should be used to represent that sound. They can also write the first letter of the upcoming word, and then you can ask them to figure out what would the word probably be. So that's some of the things that were in chapter 8. It's not all of the things that were in chapter 8. The other things it talked about were and then of course my phone rings when I am trying to do a video for you guys. So I'm going to ignore it and just laugh because you hear the bell. But some of the other things it just talked about were guided practice, and with that, engaging the children in collaborative making. So basically building several additional words by changing one letter at a time in the word. So an example could be bad to mad, mad to man to mat to bat to fan, and so on. So the teacher should emphasize the part of the word that needs to be changed by stretching the sound if possible or saying it somewhat. As children's skills increase, this type of teacher scaffolding, that stretching, should be reduced and then ultimately eliminated. So you want to kind of wean them off the teacher scaffold so that they can do it independently. And when it comes to independent practice for making words, it says practice can be provided by giving children a single vowel for which the sound has been taught and several individual letters. So another reminder too, as we're at the dollar store picking up alphabets or Goodwill or Salvation Army, to make sure we have our like little kit of alphabets and things that we can use for students to manipulate as we're doing activities like this, so we're not dependent on classroom resources. It talks about strategic emergent reading, and basically that's applying the knowledge of reading and writing. Notice the word strategic kind of goes with that explicit instruction. And then one of the things it talks about that was highlighted, it says, did you check the ending letter sound to make sure it matches your word? So at this point, they've gotten to the point where they've been identifying those initial sounds and ending sounds. And then you're going back and having them do like metacognition. Like, did you check the ending sound of that? Did you make sure that that matches the word that you thought that you were saying? A phrase that I thought would be really cool to use, especially if like you're in field, is one of the examples it gave was when the teacher was trying to reinforce what the child had done. And she said, oh, I see you're thinking like a reader. And what the child had actually done was actually an error. It was a kindergarten student, and they were looking at a picture book. And in the picture book, there was a log laying on the ground. And the text said, look at the log. Well, the child read it and saw look. And then they used the picture as a clue to help them. And they said, look at the, and then they said land, because they saw land in the picture because the log was on land. So the teacher had begun to draw the child's attention to the ending sounds in the word. And by doing that, she was able to reinforce what the child had done. So that the child realized, yes, that beginning sound was L, but instead of land, it was log. And instead of just saying, oh, that's not, try again or what have you, it was more systematic guidance when she said, did you check the ending sound to make sure that's the word that you believe that, that was? So they were using picture clues, but at the same time, then going to the word to make sure are you sure that's the word you were looking for? Let's look at the ending sound. And of course they realized land, and then they looked at the G and realized, no, that's not the sound I'm looking for. Let me focus more on the word and not just the picture. But the compliment the teacher gave was, oh, I see you're thinking like a reader. Because as we know as adults, if there's illustrations, we do look at the pictures to help give us context or give us an idea of what the print says, especially when there's diagrams or things like that. We do use that. So they are thinking like a reader, and that way they kind of leave with a little boost of confidence. And she says, as a separate note, remember, we've been talking about, and notice that we again, that Dr. DRC talked about, when you use that we language, it makes it more inclusive. The kids feel more comfortable. They don't feel like you're reprimanding them or pointing things out. She says, remember, we've been talking about the need to look all the way to the end of the word to make sure that our word has the right sound. So once again, a good example of how to do that. And then it just ended talking about how you can evaluate a child's progress. And when it comes to reading and writing isolated words, just to know that the children aren't considered proficient until they're able to make the changes to the words without needing the scaffolds of a teacher. So that's kind of the end goal, is for them to be able to do that without tons of scaffolds or supports from teachers. So yes, that was chapter 8. And honestly, it took me longer to talk about it than it's probably going to take you to read it. But just in case you're in the car driving and you can't read because we don't want you to crash another car, hopefully this was helpful for you putting together your talking points. All right, have a great day.